Right, I'm hoping everyone can. Are the slides being shared, Becky?
Yeah, we can see them.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me along for today's talk on interview hints and tips when going through organizational change. I was just saying to Becky, I'm not sure if I prefer in person or online, but either way, I get incredibly nervous about these things. So I'll apologize in advance if I talk very quickly to begin with, or end up going off on a bit of a tangent. But hopefully, the key messages will come across. And certainly, Becky's going to share the slides with everyone, and I'm going to share all my contact details as well, so that people can contact me if needed. If people would like to put any questions or anything they'd like specifically to get out of today's session in the chat box, Becky will very kindly facilitate that. And if we've got time at the end, I'll try and deal with some questions. But equally, my contact details are on there if anyone would like to contact me after the session or further down the line. I'm more than happy to help out. But essentially, I'm Martin Chadwick, and I work for a consultancy called Seymour John. There's a little bit of my history there, in that I started my career after graduating university and went into the NHS, worked there for a number of years, recruiting a team, and then moved into work for what was a company called Axon Resourcing, who primarily the last sort of 17 years, excuse me, of my career has been supporting NHS recruitment processes, whether that's directly or through support with people's career advice. I was at Northwest based conference last week, but very much sort of here to help give people advice, support in the best way I possibly can. But I won't spend too much time talking about my career, because obviously today you want to try and get some or get the value of my years of experience of supporting people with interviews and preparing for interviews. And hopefully you'll end up looking like the person that's looking at my screen is just above my head in terms of celebrating coming out of an interview, feeling that you've given it your best, and demonstrated your skills and experiences to your best, rather than coming out of the interview process and having that classic head in hands, what have I done, what have I said sort of moment. So a few hints and tips that we'll come on to in a bit. But two interesting questions. Thankfully, the NHS is significantly more structured, which helps me help you with your preparation and approach and style. But when I've worked with some commercial clients, a couple of the interview questions, not to scare you before we get started, but one question I've heard a client ask was, if you were a £1 coin and you fell into a blender, what would you do? Which was definitely an interesting interview question. They claimed it was part of trying to understand people's personalities and their approach to life, as to whether they try and sort of find a way out or just lie there and watch the blade whirl above them. But I guess an odd way of looking at personality profiles, but that's certainly something that if you are interested in, might be worth looking into. There's a variety of different free ones online that you can look at, which can help you with your interview prep, that I'll touch on in the later slides in terms of understanding your style and approach. And the other one was someone that the interview panel often offered people a drink, a cup of coffee, and if they accepted one, if they were the type of individual that would take it away with them at the end of the day, or ask if they could take it to the sink on the way out. So lots of different ways, but thankfully we don't have to worry about that too much with the NHS world and process. And certainly I'll come on to lots of the hints and tips and tricks that I can help you with as you're preparing for your interviews. But some of the bits that I'll cover today is around kind of the organizational change and approach to that, which is why I assume a lot of you have signed up today to go through that. But researching the job and the interview process, some of your interview prep, and certainly some interview tips. So there'll be this kind of 4 key areas that I'll touch on today. And like I say, people do have any specific questions, or if there's anything specifically you'd like to get out of today. I'm aware that some people might not feel comfortable asking questions in the chat box, but my contact details are up there, and like I say, more than happy and can quite happily share. There's a variety of documents that I'll touch on that I'm more than happy to share if you don't already have access to them. So please feel free to jot down my contact details and touch base with me, and like I say, I'll share those at the end as well. I'm sure Becky's got them all saved as well that she can share. I guess coming on to the organizational change element at the moment, I'll be conscious, or I'm conscious, that certainly in the Northwest, which is where I'm based and do predominantly a lot of the support with the NHS clients in the Northwest. A number of organisations are going through hospital mergers at the moment, which can lead to concerns for people. And I guess it links back to those personality types as well. As some people, the NHS going through change. Becky and I were having a brief chat at the start that the NHS seems to be constantly evolving and constantly changing, which can be deeply frustrating for individuals. It can lead to a sense of insecurity or being a little apprehensive towards things. They can often not be particularly well communicated to staff, or you can feel that you've been left out on comms and so on. Organisations are moving to being a bit more clinical led. Some of you will already be there, but certainly in the Northwest, a few of the larger hospitals are moving to being more clinical led, which is leading to significant changes in people's duties and responsibilities and how they might be working organisationally and departmentally, and how that might affect things. And again, we'll look at in a little bit in terms of job descriptions and person specs and how you might want to use some of the tools available to you to review those and look at the changes that you might be wanting to highlight in your skills and experience to be able to deal with those new roles and those perhaps changes within the department. Obviously, NHS England seems to be going through quite a bit of recruitment at the moment and been through a lot of changes, and ICBs are relatively new, and I know that some of the structures are evolving and changing there, but certainly can lead individuals to feel a little bit apprehensive and concerned, or people can really see it as an opportunity to progress and look at the different roles that are available to them. And hopefully today some of the hints and tips will remove some of that apprehensiveness, remove some of those concerns, certainly around the interview element, and preparing yourself well for the interview, and hopefully seeing the new opportunities as opportunities within the new structure, but so hopefully getting you well prepared. But like I say, when the organisation's going through organisational change, it could mean a lot of different things in terms of your role and how your job description and duties and responsibilities might be changing. You might be in a situation where certainly in the Northwest, some of the organisations have been talking about reducing their staff headcount. So there might be fewer roles and more applicants. And equally, in some departments, there have been more roles and therefore more opportunities for individuals to go for. So certainly some of the tips that we'll cover will help you. And I would always advise, it's on one of the slides later, that whichever roles you're interested in, you should always put your hat in, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, whether someone else has expressed an interest in it or it looks like it might match directly to someone else's role. It's about making sure that you're exploring the opportunities that are right for you as an individual. When you're going through change, it might be important to, depending on the organisation and what they're going through at the moment, it might be worth emphasising those change management skills that you have, looking to bring out some of those. And like I said, we'll go through a process in a bit as to how you look to emphasise those in your skills and experience. Obviously, organisational change can lead to some uncertainty around the team and the dynamic and the cultures and people's feelings and their mental health towards it, that it can be that they don't move particularly quickly often, and it's about trying to remain positive, especially when you're going into interview scenarios, because sometimes having a less positive mindset going into these situations mean that you don't necessarily perform to your best of your ability. Equally, like I said at the start, nerves can sometimes help with, or not help with your process, but towards the end there'll be some slides to help with that as well. Showcasing your adaptability and flexibility in supporting these changes, and making sure that you're trying to align to the new organisational goals and new structure that might be happening. So some of the bits that we'll go through will help you depending on what organisational change the organisation is going through or you're experiencing at the moment. So next few slides, I'm going to touch on researching and looking at the jobs that you might be looking to apply for, and therefore how that helps with your interview prep and going into your interview. And I guess the classic marketing tool, or certainly the variety of communications that seems to happen on social media these days around wait till you see slide number 3, and that's the one that no one believes. Certainly there's a slide later on that I think will benefit everyone, regardless of whether it's your first, second interview you're preparing for, or whether you've been for multiple interviews. interviews. There's a variety of tools out there these days that big organisations are supporting that can be very useful with your interview. But I won't steal the thunder for later on. I'll get to that slide in a minute. But when it comes to researching the job, some people can be very strategic, especially if it's a particular role that they're looking for, very much treat it like a chess match, in that they'll have quite a specific plan as to what they want to do, how they want to go about it, where their career might be going. For other individuals, it might be that, I just want to enjoy going to work or leave work at 5 o'clock and not have to think about it all weekend. Everyone's got different career priorities and different stages. And I guess part of doing this research will help you decide if the role's right for you, and if the role that you're going through, what key bits of information you might want to highlight in terms of your skills and experience, but also key things that you might want to know about this new role that you're applying for, whether it's a merger of hospitals and you don't necessarily know the team that you're merging with and wanting to get to know those individuals, if it's new duties and structures and responsibilities that you might have within your role. But certainly some of the sort of tips that I'll go through in terms of getting yourself ready. One of the things that we're really spoilt with in terms of it's a double-edged sword, as always, the NHS agenda for change process, and very much standardising job descriptions and person specs. They can be fantastic tools in terms of using for your prep, and certainly they're something that I would encourage you to make sure that you've read in great detail. It also means that you can hopefully take your old job description or understand your old duties and responsibilities and compare it to whichever new role you might have had shared with you, and whichever new role you're looking to apply for in the new structure or in your organisation. Because I guess a lot of the hints and tips that I'm going to start coming on to are applicable whether you're going through organisational change or if you're looking for an external role and a new opportunity, not within your organisation. Because that's certainly a lot of things that I'll touch on are when you're an internal applicant applying for a new organisation, a new role within your current organisation. But a lot of the tips and tricks that I advise are very much applicable to if you're applying for external roles. So using the NHS person specs can be a great sort of starting tool, going through them with a fine-tooth comb. And I think one of the slides that I'll touch on later is around time. It's making sure that you've got the time to dedicate to it. We've all got hectic lives outside of work these days, and certainly I think post-COVID the work and home life boundaries have been blurred a little bit as well, but making sure that you're able to carve out specific time to spend time going through the job descriptions and person specs, because you can also use it for external processes where if you're looking for that next band up, it's something that I'd advise you doing on a continuous basis, whether you're looking for a career move or not. But collecting those job descriptions and person specs is just something that you can look at. If I'm looking to apply for the next level up, what are the key things that an individual is expected to do at that next banding level, within the difference between a provider and a commissioning organisation, or a mental health and a specialist trust. What are the key differences in their person specs and job descriptions? Are there things like a Prince 2 qualification? Are there, certainly within the finance community, there seems to be a degree of flexibility around that 6, 7, 8A as to whether you need to be fully qualified or not. Some organisations are very strict in that you must be fully qualified at band 7. Others in different roles, there seems to be a degree of flexibility. So looking at those and reviewing those, you can start thinking, what are the skills and experiences that I've currently got that I can evidence in an interview environment to be able to show that I'm ready for that next roll up. So it's worth taking, if you've been through an organisational restructure and organisational change, taking those job descriptions and person specs and making sure you're giving the time to review them and look at them, making sure that you're getting hold of any internal communications that you can around the restructure and the process and what might be happening, because these can form a good chunk of your interview prep. And like I say, I think it's slide number 19. It's very handy to have these documents to hand when we get to that slide, as to how you might want to use them in the future. Where possible, it's not always something that you can do, I'd definitely be having when you're going through organizational change, but certainly externally, I'd always encourage you to have a conversation with the recruitment manager and understand as much as you can about the role and the organization, changes that you're going through. Have those conversations, because you can often you should have some key questions that you might want to ask that if you were looking at this as a career progression role, that you'd want to have answered before you go to the interview, around the duties and the expectations. What are the key challenges within the role? What are the key expectations? What does success look like? These are things that can very much help you with your prep, because although on the previous slide I mentioned about how we're fortunate that the job descriptions and person specs are very much standardized and you can use them to your advantage on that front, they also mean that you don't necessarily get the true picture of what the job necessarily involves and entails. So being able to have a conversation with the recruitment manager where applicable, if not, certainly make sure that you're reviewing any documents that are shared about the restructure or the change or the organizational situation that you're going through, to try and give you as much information as to where you want to focus your interview prep. So having that conversation with the recruitment manager, thinking about some key questions that you might want to ask. If you were using it, if you were applying for an external position, sorry, I'd certainly want you to have some key questions that you'd want to ask the recruitment manager about the organisation, the culture, the team, what's happening, etc. Because certainly you want it to be a role that's right for you as an individual. If there are a variety of opportunities that you're going for, you want to be with a manager and a team that feel are going to support your potential and enhance you to do well, rather than being in an environment that doesn't necessarily suit your personality type and your style. And as I mentioned at the start, it could be useful for some individuals to go through personality profiling, like I said, a variety of free ones online, but just to get a better understanding of you and your style and your approach that you can take into a new role. Like I say, asking questions that are going to help with your prep around the duties and the changes within the role, reviewing those job descriptions and person specs. And one of the other key things that I'm sure Becky can share information on is, if you don't have one, the finance community is very well supported with a mentoring scheme. And I'd certainly recommend signing up or approaching the scheme to look at, because in situations like going for interviews, a mentor can be really useful to run ideas past, support you with some help. The idea of a mentor is it's someone external to your organization that's supporting you, not necessarily, some people are very fortunate that they have fantastic managers that are very encouraging of people going for interviews and will run mock interviews and support them and give them some help. But certainly mentors can offer that. And I think there is an opportunity to access mock interviews. Certainly, I'm more than happy to help people prepare with mock interview type questions and how to best prepare yourself for that next interview. As I mentioned earlier, time is always a big factor with these things. Trying to dedicate some time, trying to carve out some time in very busy days and personal lives to make sure that you can focus on it. I've spoken to a number of individuals over the years where they've said, it's okay, I've cleared my diary for the night before the interview or the morning of the interview to try and do my prep. And or certainly for myself, that's not something that's going to be conducive to me performing to the best of my abilities. So trying to carve out that time where you can and do that preparation. And like I say, it's almost using or treating it like it's an external process and preparing yourself like it's an external process.
You've got on mute, sorry.
Please don't tell me that was from the start.
And you just went on mute.
Thank goodness. Yes, but depending on where I got to, I'll go back to the mentoring line and like I say, registering with that scheme, but making sure that you've got that time carved out to go and spend that time with the mentor as well, potentially, to go through a mock interview. These are all the things to try and help you perform to the best of your ability. Some people are very confident in these types of scenarios. As I was saying at the start, I get incredibly nervous doing these types of talks, and sometimes it's great to just run it past someone so that they can recognize that I might have gone down a little tangent and need pulling back, and perhaps, why have you got that particular bulletin point on the slide? But making sure that you're using all the tools that are available to you in your prep for interview. As I mentioned, when it comes to internal changes and different recruitment processes, I'd always advise you apply for roles that you're interested in. With the role and the consultative role that I do, I'm often working with different clients and have relationships with individuals that are approaching me, and or when we've supported organisations that are going through big internal changes. And it's amazing the number of times that people assume other people are going to apply for roles, so they don't apply for it, or they have different reasons as to why they don't necessarily stick their hat in, and you can end up with no one applying for the role. So it's like I say, it's important to make sure that you apply for roles that you're interested in and that you want to be considered for, especially if there are multiple opportunities that might fit the roles that you're experienced in. And like I say, links going back to having conversations with the recruitment manager, because depending on the level that you're at and where you're at within your qualifications in the finance community, there might be opportunities to change fundamentally. If you're working in management accounts, go to financial accounts, or go into a more technical role around the costing and income side of things. There are different opportunities, but making sure you're having conversations and understanding what your skills and experience are, so you can highlight those when you're either submitting your application forms, but certainly getting ready to apply for those, prepare yourself for the interviews for those roles. There's a whole other section on NHS jobs application forms, but I won't touch that now. If Becky wants me back for another one on that, I can do a session on that another time. When it comes to your interview prep, there can be elements of what is the process that you're being expected to go through, and how you want to commit your time as well. I'm, like I say, not sure whether I prefer online or in person for the talks that I give, but certainly you won't be able to see it, but I have a variety of post-it notes that I stick around the computer when it's online, that help me with my prep and what I want to focus on and what I want to talk about. That can be useful if you're going for an online based interview. Equally, I wouldn't advise what we've seen one individual do over the years, where they claim that their internet has dropped out as you can hear them typing in the background on Google to try and find the answer to something. So it's how you best use that format as to whether that might suit you as an individual for going through for interviews. But like I say, if it's online, using post-it notes or using information, you've got a bit more support that you can perhaps put in place. You do want to try and maintain eye contact where possible, but certainly it's easy to have those notes in place behind you, around the screen, sorry. If it's in person, again, it might change your prep and how you want to approach things. As I mentioned, or it's probably coming across, I can get a bit nervous at times. So if I'm going for an important meeting or an interview type scenario, I'll make sure that I know where I'm going using Google Maps and checking it in advance a couple of days beforehand to know where you're going, where you need to park. If you need access to parking, how long that takes. It all sort of starts factoring in as to how flustered you might get on the day. But certainly in person versus online, you can sit in your pajamas, or certainly on the bottom half these days for an online-based interview, whereas in person you might want to be a bit more smartly dressed and, like I say, prepare yourself for that drive time. I'll never forget, a couple of years ago, best laid plans. I had a meeting with NHS England up in Leeds, and thought, in order for me to gather my thoughts, I'll go on the train, because that means that I don't have to focus on the driving and the commute, etc. And I can just sit there and go through my notes while I'm on the train. And unfortunately, the train got cancelled as I got to the train station. So I had to turn around, get in the car and drive anyway. So, but using what's going to be best for you, it might be driving and getting there early, especially if you've got organisations that are merging and you've not perhaps been to that site, or it's in an environment that you've not been to before. When we've dealt with individuals that are particularly nervous, we've often advised go there in the lead up to the interview, introduce yourself to the reception staff, explain that you're coming for an interview next week. ask them if there's any way they can support, or if there's somewhere quiet that they'd recommend that you can arrive a little bit early, maybe sit in a coffee shop or in a quiet room and gather your thoughts and prepare yourself. Again, as part of interview prep, depending on the level and the role that you're going for, they might include a test, a presentation, personality profiles. There might be stakeholder sessions, and it's thinking about how much time and energy you want to commit to each level. And like I say, there's a variety of different documents and areas that I can share on delivering good presentations. Unfortunately, although I did sit a couple of accountancy exams back in once I graduated from university, I certainly wouldn't be able to help anyone on a technical accounting based assessment piece. But it's thinking about where you want to focus your time and your energy for interview prep as well, because you can deliver an okay presentation and a great interview and you'll probably still get offered the job. Whereas if you deliver a terrible interview but the best presentation anyone's ever seen, there's less likelihood of you being offered the job. So making sure if you are asked to do a presentation, how much of your preparation time you're going to focus on that. If there's anything that you want the panel to know in advance, I'd always communicate those. We've had individuals that are on the neurodiverse wheel, and communicating that to the interview panel as to how best they can support you, because they want to support you as an individual and make sure that you're giving your best interview that you possibly can. So for some individuals, that might be sharing the questions, the themes, or the topics in advance so that they're able to prepare. It might be giving individuals the opportunity, like I say, to prepare some things in advance or arrive early and be given things in advance. We're seeing a variety of different ways as to how individuals are being supported, but unless that information is communicated to the panel, they can't necessarily make those allowances. I had one individual a couple of months ago who mentioned that he'd had feedback around his culture had a very kind of forceful first interaction, and he was getting that as a negative from his from feedback when he was asking for feedback, as to they felt a bit sort of overwhelmed by that, and explaining that prior to the interview so that the panel were ready and prepared for that just meant that he was able to relax into it rather than being concerned about it in the future as well. But making sure that you can keep communicating anything that might be able to support you during the interview process, because if you're going through an organisational change, it might be with a manager that doesn't necessarily know you as well as your current manager, or a new manager completely that doesn't know about your background, and they want you to perform to the best of your ability. When it comes to interview prep, I'm hoping that a lot of people have heard of the STAR process, but this is the best way to start preparing your competencies. And like I say, this will link to slide 19 in a little bit, as to doing your prep. But using the STAR process is the best starting point for you preparing your interview examples during your prep. And it's not necessarily a trying to second guess what the questions are going to be. It should be more that there should be a number of examples that you can go through, put through the STAR process that would relate to this particular role, that will help you evidence your ability to do this role. So the STAR process being situation, task, action, result. And I think, I can't remember if I've included it, but certainly I'm more than happy to share that I'm a bit more old school in my approach these days, that I like to print off a piece of paper, and I'll put down one column ST, A, and R, and then across the top I'll put a competency. And if you're struggling to identify what the competencies are for the role, excuse me, again, the job description and person spec can really help with that, and not to be getting too boring, but excuse me, slide 19 is going to very much help with that as well. But so you can start going through your job description and person spec and almost thinking, what's my starred example for each of the different bulletin points? And you'll start recognizing that some of your examples cover multiple competencies as well. So making sure that you're comfortable with those, and you can, like I say, almost make sure that you're going through that bulletin point, going through your example and putting it through that STAR process. And it feels a little bit clunky to begin with, but once you start getting up to speed, you'll recognize that I need to talk about the situation. I need to talk about what was going on, what was happening. I think this is on the next slide. Yeah. So you're trying to give a bit of background when you're talking about the situation. You're trying to tell, what was happening, who was involved, what needed to be done. The actions element is what you needed to do as an individual. Task. I jumped wrong way on the boxes. The task element is the what needs to be done, what the objective was, what the situation needed to be completed, and what sort of things you were likely to bring. The action point is the really good one for people that struggle to sell themselves. The number of times I've spoken to people and they say, well, I go into an interview and I really struggle to sell my abilities. Talking about the actions that you did as an individual, making sure that you're using I rather than we, or myself rather than the team, because they want to know the bits that, a good interview panel want to know the bits that you did specifically, not necessarily the team, or you don't want to leave them with the impression of, what was that Martin that actually delivered that particular project, or was he just a support cog in the wheel? So making sure that you're using I during that actions element. And what the outcome was, and what was on the previous slide. Yeah. So the result, in talking about what the outcome was, and what that then led to. There can also be an additional R thrown in just to complicate things. Which can be that reflection piece. If it's something that you're going through at the moment, if there's something that the project hasn't necessarily completed as yet, talking about where you expect it to go, what the data is currently suggesting, what your reflections are on that, to give them an idea that you've been thinking about that and it's something that you're aware of, not just necessarily leaving them with one example was supporting a deputy director of finance preparing for an interview. And the individual really wanted to talk about this is showing my age and the number of years ago this one was, talking about the PFI project that they were heavily involved in. And it was a fantastic example of competencies around project management, external stakeholders, organizational values. There were so many different competencies that individual could use it for. Unfortunately, during their interview, they chose it as their value for money example. And unfortunately, at the time, I think they'd had quite a significant bailout to ensure that the PFI was a success. So perhaps not the best example for value for money, but making sure that as you're going through those examples, or if you're struggling with the going through the person spec and the job description to identify those competencies, one starting point can often be what are the 5, 10, 15 things that I'm really proud of that I've done, that if a new manager were to know about me, they would have no hesitation in offering me the job. And that's around if I'm in, a particular role that requires me to be client facing, or dealing with budget holders, what's my communication, what's my leadership style, what's the things that I'm particularly proud about when I've influenced budget holders. If it's something more technical, when you've perhaps updated a particular, or managed to deliver a particular amount of savings through or improve efficiencies on a particular process or system. But making sure that you're talking about them. And as I said there, that's just a very basic Word document that I've created with situation, task, action, result. And like I say, it feels a bit clunky to begin with, but it starts gathering your thoughts. And as some of the tips that I go through, you might end up with what feels like an entire book worth of paper to go through. So some people do prefer using the notepads these days, but you can then condense it down as you get closer to the interview. But if you've done all these steps, you'll hopefully go into the interview process feeling a bit more confident, because you've gone through and you've done those steps and you've thought about the different competencies, you put it through the STAR process, and hopefully that'll help with some of the nerves. But like I say, a few more slides coming up around helping with the nerves and helping you prep for interview. In terms of the frameworks that we've got access to within the NHS and the finance community, these are incredibly useful for helping you with your prep. And again, coming on to slide 19 in a second, like I said, there's lots of build up to slide 19, so I hope it doesn't disappoint everybody. But on the slides there, we've got the cube, which is the current leadership framework. The wheel with what looks like the brake discs is the previous version of the NHS leadership framework, and the appendices at the bottom. The wheel with the grey, blue, and green hopefully looks familiar to people, but that's the NHS Finance Academy finance framework, and these are all really useful as something that, again, going back to the how much time do you want to spend on the different areas with your prep. These can help you with what are the core competencies that I should be doing in each role. They'll have the different competencies for each role, for each level, and for each of the different areas of the finance. So very good to kind of have a skim read of, start helping you prep with your competencies. It can also help you with the size and scale that you might want to evidence during an interview process. Worked with individuals where they're trying to make that transition from perhaps really focused on their own division to perhaps looking after multiple divisions, or only looking after one particular area and then having to look after multiple, using the framework, especially the previous NHS leadership framework, which is the appendix, which, like I say, I think it's available on Google, but if not, I can share it with Becky and she can share it with anyone that's interested and would like it. But it was quite good from an admin and clerical perspective, that on the far left would be when you were looking after your own area of work, so more your sort of band 5, band 6s types levels, through to the far right of the table was your VSMs, your chief execs, your finance directors, and you can there were a variety of different elements and competencies through there, but you can start weaving your way through your career, that different roles you'll be exposed to different elements of it. But again, it can help with the size and scale that you're looking to use when you're framing your examples for interviews, because if you're applying for a senior role within a finance department, and they ask you about, can you talk about some of the SIPs that you've been involved in? If you know your size and scale is only talking about, paper clips and staples, it's not necessarily going to help you as well as an example that perhaps involves a patient pathway and fundamentally overhauling a system which involves engagement with multiple stakeholders external to the organisation. So, like I say, it can just help you with your size and scale and where it fits and where it should be framed within those different frameworks. So they're well worth a look when you're doing your interview prep to help you with that. These are some interview questions that I've pulled together, and that are more focused on or when you're going through organisational change and how you can help answer questions that are thrown at you when you're going through organisational change. So I'm conscious that they might be useful to some individuals depending on the change that you're going through, but for others they might not be as relevant during the interview process. But again, I'm more than happy to share those and send those through. But the one that's highlighted in yellow is what steps have you taken to prepare yourself for this new role in light of organisational change? And again, that kind of links through to that trying to take a positive approach to the organisational change and what research that you've done, and making sure that you've perhaps taken the opportunity to access some of the opportunities that are available to you within the One Finance and NHS community, getting on, like I say, the mentoring scheme, the sponsorship schemes, using some of the frameworks and so on, and making sure that you've got those, the understanding of the job description and person spec. The other example that I'd always advise people have prepared for is when have you last done something new, and putting that through the STAR process, because if you're going to go into a new role where you're expected to have new duties and responsibilities that might not necessarily align with your skill set, or current experience, sorry, you want to make sure that you're evidencing to that recruitment manager that you're going to have a positive approach to learning, that positive approach to development. How are you going to go about picking up these new skills that you might need for this new role? Because certainly they want to know that you're going to have a positive approach to it, rather than necessarily just bury your head in the sand and choose to ignore it. But yeah, so I'll come on some more general questions, and I'm more than happy to send some through in terms of people's specific needs depending on what people are going through. Showcasing your adaptability when you're going through interviews, when the organisation is going through a big change, just helps you with like I say, showcasing that positive approach to going through the change. Identifying some of the key areas that you might want to highlight in terms of your experience and support of that organisational change, and putting those through the STAR process. So some of the key bits that I'd want you to go away and do some prep on would be around that organisational resilience, your leadership potential, those problem solvings, when have you found creative solutions to things, and when have you worked collaboratively with the team and making changes depending on what's thrown at you. But like I say, these more fit into slide 19, which I think we're pretty close to, and given the time. 1 second. So things that you can pre-prepare in terms of your interview questions. Like I say, some of the competencies as at the bottom, I wouldn't necessarily try and second guess what the questions are likely to be, but having some competencies pre-prepared, you'll often find that they will slot into the questions that people have asked. And it's, again, if people need work on identifying those competencies when people are asked questions, can send a variety of tools that might help with that. But having those pre-prepared competencies will really help. But some of the key things that I'd always advise you have pre-prepared, when you're going for an interview, whether it's internal or external, is kind of that elevator pitch. When they open with, why have you applied for this role, or why you? What are the key things that you want to talk about? They're giving you a short period of time to try and showcase your skills and abilities that are relevant to this particular role. We've experienced people in the past that kind of start telling us about what happened in reception at school, and how that influenced their decision making going forward. It's trying to think of things that are relevant to this particular role that you want to highlight. I'm confident that if I asked you all to write a 3,000 word essay on your life and experience and the things that you'd want your family to know about you, you'd probably fill that 10 times over. So trying to think of that concise message that you want to get across when individuals are going to ask you in that interview process, almost why you, why us, why now, what do you want to say about them? Encountered people over the years that have had a blip in their career, or had a role that they left, and they feel there's a bit of a story there. You can control that message around that if you want to, as to why you perhaps moved on, or what the opportunity was that made you move. And like I say, you can control that message, but preparing it and thinking about it in advance, thinking about the strengths and weaknesses for the role. It's amazing the number of times that gets asked, or what do you feel your areas of development are for this role, and people struggle with an answer for that. So you can kind of think about what do I want to be telling the team about my skills and experience that I feel really match this role, and where I feel, based on my research, I might need to develop and grow. Like I say, some people will really be concerned that they don't necessarily want to show a weakness, but it's thinking about that, what's relevant to this particular role, and what do I think, being self-aware that I might want to develop on in this particular role. It might be continuing studied, it might be I want to get exposure to perhaps a more clinical side of things. It might be that I feel I'm missing some technical experience and expertise. I'd definitely make sure that you've got that done something new question pre-prepared. It's a great one for dealing with if you've gone through the job description and person spec and done the variety of steps that I've been talking about earlier. When you've gone through that STAR process for the duties and responsibilities, and thinking, you might get to one or two that you think, I've not necessarily got an experience on that, or I've not been exposed to that in any of my roles yet. Again, link back to having a conversation with the recruitment manager. It might be something that they feel they've got a decent level of support within the team, and it's not something that's a key priority, and it's just in the job description at the moment. But it might be something that is fundamental to the role, and you've not yet had experience to. So being able to evidence that you've thought about it and you've considered it, and you want to talk to them about, I'm aware that, I'll try to think of something quite, something quite technical, but I'm struggling off the top of my head. But if they ask you something quite technical and you've not had exposure to it, having been able to go away and do a little bit of research online and explain this is what your understanding of it was, and this is the last time that you did something or learned something new, it would give the recruitment manager that confidence in your ability to pick up new things and be able to understand things. We're seeing interviews move towards values-based interviews as well, where people, every NHS organisations has slightly different values these days, but making sure you've got some pre-prepared examples of how you and the values resonate with you, and what you've done as an individual and a team to support equality, diversity and inclusion is very important to make sure that our teams have a reflective population, because we know that diverse teams perform better. So how are you supporting that agenda within the NHS at the moment is something that I'd always make sure that individuals have prepared and something that's they're thinking about. Like I said, this is another interview summary sheet that I was talking about. You'd almost have a book prepared of all your examples. Trying to condense it down means that you might prepare a particular interview summary sheet like this, which is something that you could take along with you to the interview. Like I say, whether it's an online interview, you might have it on the screen next to you, just so that you have the odd trigger word that reminds you of the particular competency you want to talk about. It might be something that you take within a folder. I discussed my nerves multiple times, but I particularly like it's on one of the latest slides. I take a folder in with me. It's something that I can grip hold of, that stops my legs shaking and my hands moving around and clicking a pen in an interview environment. But I can also put that one page of notes in there of the kind of summary of the different starred examples that I've gone through, because like I say, most interview panels want you to perform incredibly well. So explaining to them that you've done some prep and, would you mind if I just look at my one sheet of notes to help me with some of my answers? I'd hope most interview panels would be supportive of that. You don't want to be going in with reams and reams of paper where you're kind of flicking through trying to find the answer. So having those one or a key trigger word that covers a specific competency, so you know what you need to think about. Like I say, in the moment when you get flustered or nervous, some key elements you might forget from that particular example. So just being able to condense it down. Like I say, the why you, why us, strengths and weaknesses, again, it helps with those nerves if you've got them written down and thought about them in advance. Excuse me. You can ignore the from PPA at the moment. That can be used when you've been through personality profiling assessment. Like I say, there's some free online ones that sometimes can be useful when you're looking for those strengths and weaknesses or struggling where to start. We're on slide 19, so I'm hopefully everyone's now very excited. But hopefully I won't ask for a show of hands given we're online, but hopefully people are aware of ChatGPT or Copilot as the variety of AI tools that are available these days. I'm convinced that these will put me out of a job, or some elements of my role will very much be put out of I'll be put out of a job by these tools. I've only played with them a little bit, and like I say, please go back to the time elements that you can get a bit like Google, where you can end up going down a rabbit hole and getting lost. But the link there, which is something either people can copy or I can send, is a Google interview practice tool that, like I say, Google have set up, where you can put in the job description and go through a mock interview where it will film you and you can review it back and see areas that you might want to change or improve, just so almost like a mock interview. If you don't feel comfortable or don't have access to a mentor or someone that can give you that support, it's a great tool that you can use. But I'm less familiar with Copilot, but ChatGPT is absolutely mind-blowing in that pretty much everything that I've been discussing up to this stage, you can use ChatGPT to do it for you. You can take a job description, you can drop it in, you can ask it to identify the competencies as a starting point. You can ask it to create a series of competency-based questions based on the job description and person spec, and it'll generate those. You can then put those questions back in and ask for, using the STAR process, please create a model answer to this particular question. And again, it'll give you a framework and a template. it's absolutely fantastic at certain elements. The huge downside and the area that I wouldn't want people to rely on it too much is it doesn't know you. It doesn't know your specific experience and your skills and your abilities. So they're the bits that you've got to add, that you've got to make sure that once it's given you a template, once it's given you the some of the information, that you're then adding your information on top of that to make sure that it's relevant to you as an individual. So it's an absolutely fantastic tool. Like I say, it's mind-blowing what it can do in terms of generating interview questions, helping you with your interview prep, identifying competencies. Again, if it asks you to deliver a presentation, if it asks you to that there's going to be a stakeholder panel. These are all things that you can put into it, and it'll come up with options, solutions, templates for you. So a really useful tool for people to be using. Like I say, remember to factor in the time element. Don't go down that rabbit hole. Make sure that you're not using it as a sole use of information. Because it does have its flaws, and making sure that you're putting your information and adding your information into it would be one of the keys. But certainly, if you've not used it for an interview process, I'd definitely advise having a play around with it. Like I say, you can put the job description and create interview questions so that you can practice those and get yourself ready. But definitely a tool to use. You can put in the frameworks and again ask it to create questions and scenarios. You can put your CV in there and ask it to generate a new CV for you. Or certainly I struggle with my with dyslexia, and being able to use it as a tool to support my language and punctuation and grammar and so on is like I say, it's mind blowing what it can do. But certainly something I'd advise people use as part of their interview prep. Very much conscious of time, so I'll perhaps go through the last couple of slides quite quickly. So that people do have the opportunity to ask some questions. But like I say, I've got all my contact details will be available. But I'd say, as hard as going into an interview and as nerve-wracking as they are, trying to remember that they want you to do well, they want you to perform to the best of your abilities. Explaining that you're nervous in advance, or asking them to repeat questions. It's trying to have that bit of confidence. Like I say, using a notebook to help with those nerves, and writing down those notes. Where possible, having a conversation with the recruitment manager, the hiring manager, making sure that you can get as much information from them to support you with your interview prep. Using the tools like Google and ChatGPT for practice, using the mentoring scheme, making sure you're pulling together those prep documents around the STAR process, condensing it down, and remembering where you want to focus your time. As I mentioned earlier, you can deliver the best presentation in the world, but if you don't deliver a decent interview, you're not likely to get offered the role. So making sure you're focusing your time in the appropriate areas. As I mentioned with nerves pre-interview, using a folder can be useful to stop the jiggling leg. Explaining that you're nervous, and getting that support from the manager. I find an individual called Sam Harris who does some guided meditations. If that's something that people find useful, can be very good to do. Like I say, if you're arriving a little bit early for the interview, or the morning of, just trying to gather your thoughts and calm yourself down. And recently been introduced to or used more the Calm app, and again, very useful for helping with those nerves. Again, it's not necessarily something that you can download on the morning of the day and hope it'll cure you of your nerves and help, but certainly something to think about if you are someone that gets particularly nervous during interview processes. Like I say, I've found it quite useful, but it does take a bit of practice and getting used to. Making sure that you're on the day, whether you're going on site, dress code, make sure that you're smart and comfortable and presentable. I ran an internal process relatively recently where I think the individual forgot that wearing pajamas to work wasn't necessarily appropriate, unless on charity days and on teams. So making sure that you are treating it a bit like an external process, and being smart and presentable. Like I say, getting there early if it's a new location that you're not used to. Remembering that everyone that you meet on the day could potentially be part of that interview process. Remembering that we want to be kind in this world. Probably isn't as relevant to you in the NHS finance community, but certainly mine being in the recruitment world. There was a a story that went viral a couple of years ago about someone down in London who, knocked someone over on the tube and was, not particularly pleasant, quite rude to the individual, and was, why weren't you looking where you were going, and not a particularly kind and pleasant individual. Fast forward half an hour and they were sat on an interview panel with the individual sat on the desk in front of them. So making sure that you're whoever you meet on the day, we're also aware of one organisation where they invited the former chair back to show individuals around the hospital, and that was part of the kind of informal process. Being aware of your body language. Like I say, I'm someone that when I get nervous, I hunch over quite a lot. My leg jiggles quite a lot. Again, the Google interviews can be quite helpful for filming yourself and seeing what you perhaps how you perhaps come across. And I'll stop talking and see if anyone's got any questions at the moment. I've not had the chat open, but hopefully that's been useful for the people.
Right, I had a quick question. You had that interview summary sheet and
Yep.
you said trigger words.
Yep.
Would a trigger word be something like comms skills or manage a project or something?
Indeed, to be honest, it'd be something that would be personal to you that would help you jog your memory. Because if you do want to use that kind of interview prep sheet, it would almost be something that you'd want to have in front of you on the table. That would be something that you'd glance down at to help you with your nerves to jog your memory as to which competency you want to cover. So it might be something as simple as Martin, because you know that when you were managing Martin, he's someone that you wanted to talk about and go through the example that you had with him.
I wanted to ask another question actually. When I think about examples or the star, I seem to be so verbose. It's like a War and Peace episode, and I like to tell a story. And have you got any tips on how to really condense it? Because I'm an EDI rep who I've been sitting on certain interviews, and it's so different to the style that, when I've been on the other side of an interview and when I've been on a panel. And the recent interviews I've been attending, the responses have been very, very brief and short. And, I would have expected more, but I don't know. How do you stop yourself really from going on and on and on?
Well, a difficult one, because as I'm sure you've seen from the presentation, I can ramble on a little bit, and my wife often says that I can turn a short story into a long one. But it can come down to perhaps a bit of practice, a bit of work with a mentor, an individual that's looking at your examples for you. It can be, like say, using the STAR process and thinking, what are the key messages that I do want to get across, and treating each element almost as 25%. If your situation, if you're not giving them enough information there, your task, your action, result, you kind of want to give them equal weighting as to which bits you want to try and get across for that particular competency. But it might be, like say, something like Google, that the mock interviews that you can use there, where you can film yourself or practice with someone, and they might be able to help or point in the right sort of direction. So I'm more than happy if you want to have a chat around that, and any particular specific support can help with.
Thank you.
There's some questions in the chat. There's one that says, is it okay to use the STAR approach when answering conflicting deadline interview questions?
Yes, depending on the question, but I'd use the STAR approach in your prep for pretty much most or all competencies when it comes to going for an interview. It just gives you that kind of framework to start using, as to knowing that you need to give a bit more information about that situation, the tasks that needed doing, the actions and the result. So I'd hope that you'd have depending on what the specific question was, if it's given as an example of how you would approach conflicting deadlines, hopefully you've put that through the STAR process and can evidence when you specifically and had that experience. So it's making equally, if it's just how would you deal with conflicting deadlines? It might be more of, what your style and approach is, rather than necessarily your experience of doing it. So that's where the STAR process really comes into its own, is when you're evidencing your previous experience and what you've done.
Oh, we've got another one. What sort of questions do you suggest are asked at the end of the interview? My team is going through a structural change. I would usually ask about the organisation, but I know the organisation well.
So again, it comes down to you as an individual and what might be important to you. And so a whole other different presentation, but hopefully when you're thinking about applying for a role, conscious that this is going through a restructure, so perhaps not necessarily something that you've been thinking about from this is my next career move. It might be I've got to apply for this particular role, but you should have things that are important to you, and almost 10 factors when you're looking for a new role. That might relate to the culture of the organization. It might relate to the staff and development, the structure, the hybrid working at the moment. So there'll be a variety of different things that are personal to you as an individual, and it's almost thinking back to those. So it might be around I want to demonstrate that I have a passion and enthusiasm to continue learning. So what would be the opportunities to develop, or where might this role take me in my career plan, because I'd like to progress to X position in the future. With going through an organizational change, this is going to take me down a slightly different route. So what skills do you think from a team would support me to make those transitions, and so on. But yes, it can be linked to you as an individual. Equally, without passing the buck too much, you can also stick it into, if it's something that you do want to asked at the end of an interview to show enthusiasm, you can stick it into ChatGPT again and ask it for a series of, these are the things that are important to me. What would be some questions that I could use at the end of the interview process to show my enthusiasm, or show my desire to continuously learn, or show. So like I say, you can kind of tweak it and find one that you feel comfortable with.
We've got another one. What are some of the questions you can ask the hiring manager prior to the interview to know more about the role?
Again, I'd almost throw that back to the things that are important to you. There would be some key things that, if you think you've got that individual for a short period of time, it would be the things that would be important to you that would link to those factors that you're interested in. Every organization, or certainly across the Northwest, we like I said at the conference last week, it was quite interesting that Julian Hartley was there, and he asked everyone to put their hands up as to who's expected to be in the office 1 day a week, and a variety of hands went up 2 days, 3 days, and it just demonstrated that everyone across the Northwest was operating differently from a hybrid working perspective. So that might be something that's important to you. So you might want to understand that before applying for a particular role. It might be the opportunities for development, the support around your development into the role, if there's something specific that you're missing. So for argument's sake, it's going to be your first transition into a leadership based role or a managerial based role. What are the opportunities for you to access training in order to be able to deliver your best within the role? Or it might be something more personal around completing your qualifications, or access to training for a particular area of the job that you need support in. It might be something, like I say, when you're going through organizational change, it's perhaps a bit different to external, but certainly for me at the moment, my daughter is starting school in September, and I would love to be able to have an early finish 1 day a week to make sure that I can at least do one of the pickups from school. So that would be something that would be really important to me, and I'd want to clarify before I accepted a role, certainly. So like I say, a bit more linked to you. Again, you can play around with the likes of ChatGPT as to finding something that you feel comfortable with in terms of what you want to ask in advance. But there would always be key ones about main priorities in the role, main challenges, what does success look like, what are the relationships like with budget holders or within the team. Have you got examples of when individuals have been particularly successful within the role? Or what would you be looking for in an individual who's applying for this role? What would be the key challenges, and making sure that you're highlighting those in your application form and in your interview prep. Hoping that's helped.
Oh, there's one final question, but I think you may have already answered it in that answer, and it is it okay to ask if they allow work from home or flexi hours?
Yes, and as far as I'm aware, please forgive me if I'm wrong or right. You're allowed to ask for flexibility from day one now, are you? When you start a new role. But certainly I'd want that clarifying. Certainly, like I say, in the Northwest, every organisation has implemented hybrid working and flexible working differently, and sometimes it can depend on the role and the organisation and what's happening. Like I say, we've got everything from, I don't think anyone's gone to 5 days a week back in the office, but I am aware that a couple of organisations have gone to 4, which almost attracts some individuals that want that return to office, but also deters people that don't want to be in the office 4 days a week. So I'd definitely look to answer it, or certainly have it answered before you accept a new role, because some of the questions that you might want answering, again, it's thinking, do I want to ask this as a pre-interview question, or do I want to ask this as a pre-acceptance? Because not necessarily something that's discussed within NHS interviews because of the salary bandings and the strictness around agenda for change and so on. But certainly in the commercial world, it's kind of that, what salaries on offer. Again, that's something to kind of ask to acceptance when you know that they're interested and you want to make you an offer. If you go in with, I'm only going to accept the job if you give me top of scale, it's more likely to have a negative impact than a positive at first impression.
There is one more question.
Yep.
Some interview feedback says you did not speak more, and some feedback says you have talked too much. So what is the best approach to this?
Ooh, tricky, but trying to be yourself. I think that's where sometimes a conversation with the recruitment manager in advance can help if it's someone that you don't necessarily know as an individual, because and again, linking to the personality profiling, unfortunately, you can't ask the interview panel to do their personality profilings and share it with you in advance. But it's trying to understand them and their approach. As you could probably tell during the presentation, I'm quite comfortable with, or I wouldn't say comfortable, but talking and telling stories. Under other individuals, it's very much one word answer, and I'm sure there are people in the crowd that are thinking this could have been done in 10 minutes, not an hour. So it's about trying to understand the individuals, which you might be able to gauge from that initial conversation with the recruitment manager. But I advise that you are being yourself, as long as you've gone through that STAR process and helped you with that structure of your questions, looking at the NHS leadership framework and using all the tools available to you. You would want to give your experience and skills the right justification. And if that means talking a bit too much during an interview, I'd rather you went with that approach and sold yourself well than came out thinking I didn't say enough during the interview process. And the right interview panel do want to listen to what you've got to have to say, provided it's relevant to the role and your experience and the opportunity. Like I said, they don't necessarily want to know what you had for lunch a week last Thursday.
Another question: how do I know that interviewers are still listening or I've lost them, especially during a Teams interview?
Again, really hard during especially online based interviews. Hopefully they would communicate if they're writing notes. Certainly we supported one interview process recently where the panel explained that they would be writing notes, so they'd probably be looking down rather than looking at the camera and trying to make eye contact. So I think this is one of the things that the post-COVID world and Teams-based interviews has really sort of affected, is that personal engagement. So again, I'd try to not let it bother you as an individual. Stick to your STAR processes. Try and explain that you're trying to get your experience across. Sorry, because it's difficult to tell. And when I've collected feedback from individuals post-interview processes, some of them have said, "Oh, it was terrible, the worst interview I've ever done," and they end up getting offered the job. Or I did something that went off on a tangent and didn't perhaps give my best experience, and they're the individual that's offered the job. So I'd always advise to focus on yourself, focus on your performance as best you can. You can't control if the panel that you're interviewing with as to whether they're introverted or different personality type to you, and if they're having to take notes down. So trying to not concentrate on them and be yourself. It is difficult, but again, perhaps using that Google interview option to film yourself, or do a Teams interview with a mentor to get a feel for if there might be something obvious that's making someone switch off that you can learn from and work on, might be useful.
There's another one here.
Mm-hmm.
In a virtual interview, is it okay to ask the questions to be put in the chat one by one?
Definitely, as you're going. I've already seen environments where that's happening, where they ask the question and they've obviously got it pre-prepared. So again, that's something that I would communicate in advance, that in order for you to perform your best, would it be possible for the questions to be shared in the chat box and give you a second to read it before you answer? Again, a perfectly acceptable allowance during an interview process. So I'd definitely ask them, but again, I'd ask them in advance so that they can prepare it and have it pre-typed, so it's not a case of them having to spend the time writing the answer in the chat box. They can just literally copy and paste it and drop it in for you and give you the time to prepare.
One just put in, during the interview, is it appropriate to jot down the questions before answering? What are the best options recommended?
If that's going to help you perform to the best of your ability, I'd definitely ask the interview panel in advance if that's something that you can do. Because again, they want you to, or I would hope that they're wanting you to perform to the best of your ability. So again, as the question before, it might be something that you'd like to ask them in advance of, please, if it's an online based interview, can you drop the questions into the chat as you ask them, so that I can, or my processing is better when I've read the question rather than listened. And again, similar, communicating that in advance and asking them if they wouldn't mind having a printout of the questions to hand to you during the interview process so you can read them. Again, these would be allowances that I'd hope an interview panel are going to support you with. But again, it's communicating with them in advance that they can give you that support.
Another one. Mm-hmm. Can you ask for the questions prior to the interview? It sounds like this is happening.
Yes and no. Yes, it's always worth asking, in that if you don't ask, you don't get. But I'd have, if it's something that supports you to deliver your best performance, it's definitely worth asking. Like I say, I'm increasingly seeing clients share the questions, in advance. If not the questions, certainly the themes to help people prepare. But like I say, hopefully the bits that we've gone through in terms of the prep and using the likes of ChatGPT can help you, if they're not willing to share them, to certainly create a bank of questions that can help you with your prep, so that you know that you're going in to give the best example that you best evidence of your experience and background during that interview environment. So if they're not willing to share them, I would hope that you could get something relatively similar from the likes of ChatGPT or a mentor that can help you pull together questions. Certainly in the past, I've done it for individuals, where it's you take that job description, take the person's spec, and you can kind of second guess 60-70% or a certain percentage of the interview questions in advance. But certainly something you can ask for and see what the response is.
Thank you. I think that might be it. So thank you very much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining.
No,
I will circulate the recording and the slides.
brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.